I'm Jonathan Gerwitz, Vice President of KGB Texas Communications, and welcome to The Point. Today, our guest is Joe Straus, who served 4 terms as Speaker of the Texas House. That tied a record for the longest tenure of House Speaker in Texas history. Since leaving the House in 2019, Joe has been serving as Chairman of Texas Forever 4. Talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But first, welcome, Joe.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good to be with you.
Joe, you're a respected voice for moderation, for principled conservatism and seriousness in politics. So I have to begin with your thoughts on the unprecedented events that have taken place as we record this segment in mid-January.
Yeah, it's been quite a week. Today, the U.S. House of Representatives is taking up the articles of impeachment, It's been a sad week, a week of a lot of anger expressed by many people of differing opinions. But I think the more we learn about the overtaking invasion of the U.S. Capitol, the more chilling that event becomes. But it's really frightening to think about how much worse it could have been.
Right.
And, you have to go back before that tragic event to the election, which wasn't historically, all that close. We've had a lot of elections just in my voting lifetime that were closer than that one. And I think it's really important to remember that elections belong to the people. They don't belong to one person. They certainly don't belong to a president. And I think that the president should have conceded as soon as it was clear, as it was, should have been. He should have conceded and not spent those weeks after the election whipping up other people with false claims that the election was stolen. And, I think this is on the president, it's on his family, but we shouldn't overlook the role that many members of Congress and some senators played in this, fanning the flames, encouraging this insurrection. And there were a few state leaders too, unfortunately, some from Texas. So it's been a sad week, a challenging week, and a disappointing week. And we shouldn't forget it. I just can't think of anything more un-American than to deny the will of the people to satisfy one person in government or to play into the ambitions of a small number of pretty radical Republicans who hope to succeed him.
Let's bring things a little bit closer to home. The Texas Legislature has begun its 87th regular session. The composition of the legislature is not a lot different from what it was when you left 2 years ago, but this is going to be a session unlike any other. I'm wondering what you think the key issues are going to be for the folks in Austin.
Clearly, this is going to be a session that has to focus and deal with the coronavirus, both in the substance of the issue and doing what is necessary to support a more robust rollout of the vaccine, but also in the way the legislature goes about its business and how often they can meet, the arrangements under which they can conduct their business in committee and on the floor of the House, the ability of the public to personally access the members during this 140 days, which is really an important part of the lawmaking process. Our economy's taken a hit, obviously, in the last year, although after Comptroller Hager's revenue estimate update on Monday, doesn't look as bad as many people had feared. But there are going to be a lot of demands on resources. And I think the biggest job is going to be balancing the state's budget, even if it isn't as ugly a situation as as some of us had to face in 2009 or 2011 in particular. But the state has gone through so much growth. Year after year, it grows tremendously. And so do the services that citizens require. And so while the economy may not have grown as fast as our population, it's going to be a real challenge, I think, for the legislature to continue to provide the improvements in education that they made last session through House Bill 3, which was an $11 billion bill between an increase in education funding and a decrease in property tax rates, a buy down. And that becomes even more expensive into the future. But there are investments that have to be made in education, have to be made in healthcare, mental health, which has been an area of real success in the last few sessions. And mental health needs will only be growing as a result of the isolation and the anxiety that people have gone through in the last year. And I think they have to keep in mind the stress on small businesses in the state. There are many small businesses that have closed. There are many small businesses that may be open today, but they're barely hanging on by a thread. Been a lot of job losses and a lot of healthcare coverage that goes along with those job losses. So while the fiscal picture from the comptroller wasn't as dire as many people expected, it certainly isn't rosy. And I think most of the challenges are going to be around the fiscal picture. There's a long list, but those are just a couple.
Well, you mentioned public education. That was a keystone issue for you when you were speaker. You mentioned that in the last session, the legislature significantly increased state funding for public education. Is that going to be sustainable in the current environment? And is there a will among the current leadership to keep that going?
So there is a way. I think the state budget situation today will allow them to continue, at least to maintain the good things that they did in the last session in terms of teacher pay and in terms of committing to providing for full day pre-K for those children who currently qualify. I think it's interesting that that comments from both the leader of the House and the leader of the Senate are saying the right things. They're claiming that there's a will to maintain it. I hope they'll be good to their word. I think that if they're not, they should remember the voices at the ballot box in the last midterm election, where the Texas House lost 12 seats, where the lieutenant governor came within a hair or two of losing against a basically unfunded, unknown opponent. So I think the supporters of public education in 2018 came out in force. And that was a good thing because the legislature got serious and did do some very good things. But so I'm not pessimistic, but supporters of public education are going to need to keep our leaders and our legislators' feet to the fire on that.
Let's talk a little bit about what you've been doing since you left the legislature a couple of years ago, especially your work with Texas Forward.
Yeah, well, I started, well, I was fortunate to leave public office with some political funds in my campaign account, and I decided to continue my involvement in politics through creating a new political action committee called Texas Forever Forward. And it's a way to stay engaged. What I've done with it in this last cycle was to support other elected officials in their campaigns and other organizations that support Republicans who I think are responsible, responsible and calm, reasonable, productive members of the legislature primarily, although I've supported a few mayors here and there and other county officials. But it's been a way for me to stay engaged. Our PAC raised and spent $1 million in this cycle, helping other people. I also use the PAC as a way to speak out on education, to speak out on mental health reforms, and to speak out on a number of issues that I care passionately about and I think are important for our state and for a healthy Republican Party moving forward. I've also been engaged on a national level as a board member of the Republican State Leadership Committee, which is an organization that supports legislative candidates in the 50 states and tries to build Republican majorities in the states. So I'm engaged in politics, in policy, and using this platform to remain in the mix of things.
Well, Joe, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for your years of service in the public sector. You and your family have been a real treasure to our community here in San Antonio and to the people of Texas. So thank you, and thank you for joining us on The Point.
You're kind, Jonathan. Thank you for all you do as well, and thanks for your many years of friendship.